Hey Josh, how you doing tonight, brother?
Hey, doing well. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you. If we can, those of you who are watching right now on Facebook, do me a favor, go ahead and share this on your wall. Invite some people to come and watch it with you. I'm excited about the conversation we get to have tonight with Josh, and get y'all to meet a guy that I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to watch over the past couple of years since we've known him. So let's jump right into it, Josh. Dude,
Yeah,
you are not only are you a financial consultant and coach, but you're also an author.
correct. Yep.
So
One down. Probably one more in the pipeline in the next.
one
I don't know how many years, but yeah, one down.
one more to go, huh?
Yeah, one
Well,
more for.
let's talk about your book real quick before we jump into the financial side. Which, for those
Sure.
who are watching this, developing a prophetic lifestyle, cultivating a prophetic community. So, talk to me about this, Josh, because I thoroughly enjoyed it whenever I read it, and it has. I've actually had some of my staff. I've had them read it as well. What was your inspiration and reason for this?
Yeah. So several years ago, as a part of the Welton Academy, I'd gone through all of the Supernatural Bible School for the training, and they'd offered a mentorship. So I was in the mentorship with Ivan Roman.
Okay.
And part of that process was we had to come up, we either could do a teaching, we could do whether that be like a recorded message or some type of a written path. And at the time, I didn't have necessarily preaching opportunities that were regular for me to be able to do something to fulfill that part of my coursework. So I put together a bunch of notes and ended up developing this manual. I had the text of it was from that project, and then the rest of it kind of came together afterwards. One of our, I believe he's a mutual friend, Dax Batalan from Denmark, actually was the one who prodded me to take the step from taking my project that I did to actually looking at self-publishing. So
Okay.
looked into that. Another friend, Colin McIntyre, he's the one that did the graphics and kind of helped me do some of the editing. And had another friend who was part of the mentorship course, did some proofreading for me. And then you can thank Amazon was the actual publishing platform. So easy peasy. And that's what brought that into your hands.
So if anybody wants to get this, I'll show it one
Yep.
more time. Developing a prophetic lifestyle, cultivating prophetic community. If you want to grab it, you can grab it on Amazon. And right now, actually, I want to say it's on sale.
Yeah. Could be. And
Yep.
you can also, if you prefer ebooks, there's a digital version as well.
Okay. And you can get the paperback right now for less than $5.
Yep.
So
There you go.
got it on sale. Make sure you go ahead and if you're watching, if you're following with me, you want to learn a little bit more just about the basics of the prophetic and kind of diving into it. What is it? What is a prophet? How all of it works? Grab that. Go to Amazon and grab it as quick as you can because it'll be beneficial to you. I can assure you. So
Thank you.
what I never got to meet Ivan. However, Colin, I've interacted with him a little
Hmm.
bit because he did the graphic for one of the books that we published here.
Cool.
Because with Veritas Church, we also operate Veritas Publishing,
Hmm.
and he handled. We have a book that one of our pastors wrote as our story of coming out of domestic violence,
Hmm.
and he did the graphic for it. It was really cool experience. So
Yeah.
we kind of told
That's
him
good.
we said just kind of let the Holy Spirit guide you, do kind of
Hmm.
like a prophetic deal and run with it, and he did, and it was exactly what she had seen in her mind. So it was a fantastic thing.
Yeah, I mean, he hit it with the graphic pretty quick. The only thing he really modified was we changed a few of them, maybe like the accent colors, and that was really kind of about it. He kind of hit the right idea first pass. So it was pretty cool how that worked out with him.
So what all I mean, are you still involved in ministry, or is
Well,
this
we recently moved, like you and I were just discussing earlier. My wife and I just relocated from the Charlotte, North Carolina area down to Auburn, Alabama, really just a few months ago. So we're still visiting churches, trying to find where we're supposed to fit in for this next season of life. And at that point, I do plan on getting back into most likely just doing small groups first, build relationship, and then just kind of see where the local leadership, if they want to facilitate using me in more than that, that's fine. I'll be open to it. But My main thing would be getting back into small groups and just doing what I've done before, which would be, kind of teaching through some of the prophetic stuff, and then also
Right.
through relationships, kind of be available for the financial side. And that can be a little different. Sometimes churches want to be a little more aware of the financial side. If there's more than just coaching that's needed, if there's actual assistance that's needed, usually want to have more of a structure behind that just to help people out. So either or, we'll see kind of where it goes, see where the needs are too.
Moving and finding a new church to actually become connected to can be an experience in and of itself.
Yes, there's been a diversity. There's the few that we've visited so far have all been very different. So it's it's a process, and it takes open communication with my wife and I. Like, hey, this is what we kind of felt was with us on this one. This is kind of where I feel like that maybe not be for us. And then, it's not a matter of finding the perfect place. Like, there's nowhere unless you start your own
Right.
place you're going to be in 100% agreement with. But you kind of have to have what are the most important values to you. And like for me, the biggest thing for me is I gauge the spiritual atmosphere of the congregation. And that may sound kind of weird, but all that means is I'm looking to go, are these people passionate about Jesus, or are they just playing the game at church just because they're in the South and they feel like they need to go on a Sunday? That to me is important. You can teach doctrine, and the head knowledge that pairs with the heart can be taught, but it's a lot harder to kickstart a dead car. I know that sounds kind of harsh. I'm just being, a little more transparent on that, but give me a tender heart that loves the Lord, that doesn't know much scripture. You can disciple people the scriptural side, but it's not always as easy to develop the passionate side. Like that's something that can be a little trickier, especially if they have too much head knowledge. That can make it even harder. That's just from my experience, you know, living in the church for 40 years almost. I've seen that it seems to be easier to teach than it is to inspire sometimes.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate without a doubt. um,
Probably know a
and I
little
can
more than me on that
yeah,
side.
and I can actually even say that coming from somebody who has started a church, that even when you start a church, you're not always 100% okay with with all of it. There's there's sometimes you're like, wait a minute, did I do this?
Well, yeah,
I don't know if I did that correctly.
I've told people if I agree with myself 100% what I believe right now, 5, 10 years from now, then that probably means that I've become stagnant, because you should always, now the tenets of the faith stay the same.
Right.
Don't hear me wrong, anybody. But what I'm saying is as we're pliable before the Lord and we continue to study and to be open to hearing other views from other scholarly perspectives, other believers on those non-core tenets, to think that we're 100% right now, to me, is a pretty arrogant thought process. We may not think of it that way, but if you kind of lay it out and go, okay, well, if I think I'm 100% correct, out of all the millions and millions of believers out there, I'm the one who's got the 100% patent on the faith. That's a very, very narcissistic attitude, and I don't want to have that attitude. So I want
Right.
to continue to learn, continue to grow, and I don't agree with myself from 5 years ago. So I'm still learning and I'm still growing.
Right. It's dangerous too. It's dangerous to have that kind of a mindset to think that I've got everything figured out.
Yep,
Because at that point,
exactly.
what happens whenever we come up against an obstacle or a situation that we don't know how to address? We have
Hmm.
to we have to come face to face with our own humanity and our own infallibility, our fallibility, and
Yeah.
realize, okay, um, now I have to backtrack on quite a few
Hmm.
things. So
Exactly.
you've how long have you been a Christ follower?
Gosh, I grew up in the church, so I can remember praying in the back seat of my mom's car, driving home from my grandmother's house when I was like 6 years old. And I don't even think I told my parents for probably like months after that that I had
Right.
done that. And then my dad baptized me when I was a little kid. At the time, he was a Baptist minister, so I've literally grown up in the church my entire life, and I've been a actual follower since I was like 6 years old. So through that, I've seen multiple seasons of the church. I grew up. I've experienced multiple flavors, different denominations, non-denominational, kind of the spectrum, from the more word focused to the more spirit focused, and everything in between. So I, I think I have a fairly accurate perspective of just seeing different parts of the church. I haven't seen it all,
Right.
but I've seen a lot enough to see that there's similarities, and there's also there's pros and cons to all of them in terms of where people tend to uh, plant their foot down and say, I'm not going to grow further.
Right.
To tag on what we've previously been talking about.
So now you've got me. Now you've got me very curious as to how a young man who comes from technically comes from a Baptist background
Hmm.
ends up writing a book on the prophetic. Like, how do you go unless now again, I'm from South Carolina, the buckle of the Bible Belt, and
Yeah.
denominations don't cross. Like, we've got once they've got their ideas set on what is and is not okay and what is and is not biblical or scriptural, they don't cross that. And you're Southern Baptist here, the prophetic is not a thing.
Yeah. Oh, it
Uh,
gets weird. I have a more even diversified background than that. I'll give you the cliff notes.
all right.
Dad was Baptist minister. When my dad left the ministry to pursue more family focus, we moved down to the Gulf Coast. We were part of some non-denominational churches for a period of time. And then if you recall, the Brownsville revival was in Pensacola, Florida. So I
Right.
only lived 45 minutes away from that. So that was around my late middle school years. So we went to many a meeting over at the Brownsville revival. And then in college, I was at a smaller university. There wasn't, again, a lot of church options. So I was part of a Baptist ministry there, but I was discipled by a Reformed campus ministry, campus outreach, which is more Presbyterian, highly Reformed. So that was in the college years. And then it was after that, I was a part of a large megachurch as an adult. So more of your kind of church plant, seeker friendly model type of deal. And then I got in contact with some people who had gone to Bethel Ministry School and joined a para ministry that was more just young adults. It wasn't just young adults, but it started as young adults who were getting together, praying together, and worshiping together, and then actually doing the stuff. So that was when I started getting exposed to the supernatural. Bill Johnson, Randy Clark, praying for healing of the sick, that sort of thing. Got involved with that group, and then that started bringing in, okay, well, there's also this prophetic thing. And it was just a lot of different, it was always through relationships, always through people that I knew them, and I knew that they weren't weird. I knew that they loved the Lord and they were a safe heart to connect with. And then
Right.
they would be the one that would kind of ease me into these different things. And then it just kind of kept stemming from there. I'd meet somebody else. Hey, have you heard of this book? Or hey, have you heard of that book? And it's, I just wanted to learn and grow. I'd learned enough in a short period of time that I knew that I had a lot I needed to unlearn and then relearn. So I just went on this journey and I'm still on it. It's like, hey, here, I'm holding everything I know like this. It's like
Right.
my thought is if it's truth, you can question it, you can poke at it, you can prod at it. And if it's truth, it's going to remain. And if it's
Right.
not, well, I've lost with something that wasn't truth. So I didn't lose anything. I actually gained something by losing a false belief.
Right. It's interesting to me how often we refer to it whenever I'm teaching, I often refer to it as the principle of first truths, in which when we're taught something or we learn something, we tend to want to hold on to that and not let go of it at
Yeah.
all. And way too often it's detrimental to our faith, and it's detrimental to the it's detrimental to the growth of our faith and to our maturity, because we hold on to something that in reality, um, so, sometimes our doctrine can become the prison in which we exist, and we're not
Yeah.
able to experience life to its fullest because we're trapped by what we've been taught about God instead of what God has actually revealed to us about himself.
Yeah. A lot of that's
So,
it's the Western perception. So like one of the things that I learned that was a real eye opener for me was the old Hebrew perspective. They had a different way of thinking of truths and the way that things could combine. We think Western thought, we think linear. We think, well, this has to be plus this equals this. And we don't really leave room for mystery. And the
right,
ancients had no problem with mystery. They were okay with not fully understanding God. Whereas in the Western world, we have to have an understanding. That's where systematic theology came from. We have to have an explanation and an understanding for every facet of life. And what they then do is you have to box God in some way. Well, how can you box in an infinite God? You
right.
can't.
Yeah, I tell my people oftentimes that real faith requires unanswered questions.
Yep. That's where the
That
relationship comes in.
right. We
Yeah.
can't. It goes back to what we were talking about with with denominations kind of staying in one little thing. The book of Hebrews tells us that we go from glory to glory. And
Mhm.
that's kind of part of the journey, part of the experience of who God and Christ and the Holy Ghost is in our life. And what I've noticed is, what I kind of like to look at it is, most of our denominations were started by individuals or by people who were on that journey, found a place in their walk that they experienced the Holy Spirit and they experienced God, and they said, this is all there is to it.
Yeah.
And instead of allowing themselves to grow into something more or to see something more of Him, they kind of camped out right there.
Yep.
You know,
They
which
persecute the
which
next.
right, but
Unfortunately, that's the history of the church. Unfortunately.
right, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, my goal is, as long as we can agree on the basics, as long as we can look at that and we can say, Jesus he's the Son of God. He is fully God, fully man. He was born of a virgin. He died on a cross. He rose 3 days later. Then we can get along. Like, we don't have to agree on everything in
Yeah.
order in order
Exactly.
to pursue this. Like, we can kind of move through this thing one layer at a time,
Mhm.
and just really truly pursue life.
Yeah.
But I don't
It
know
is.
why.
It's the arrogance of man. Unfortunately.
I don't understand why we have to demand that people agree with every single thing that we believe before we'll connect.
Yeah. I'm
So
with you. I'm with you.
so let me ask you, Josh, because not only are you an author, not only have you pursued some ministry training, but you have also you're also a financial counselor and financial coach, consultant. Kind of walk me through some of that. Have you always thought that you were going to work with numbers and finances, or is that something that kind of got thrown into your lap, or how did this happen?
I knew I wanted to do something within the business realm when I was in high school. I hadn't really determined exactly what I wanted to do when I went to college. I just knew that I wanted to do something within the business realm of industry. So I was visiting the college that I was going to attend, on like a campus visit, and our tour guide happened to be an accounting major, and we were just asking questions about the school, the program, and this is how. Okay, I was not as mature then as I am now. I will say that point blank. I was 18, and I was just thinking about more short-term things, and I knew that if I went through the program and I completed the program, which it was a 4-year undergraduate, and if I stuck around for 1 year and got my master's, that I would have the credentials I needed to sit for the CPA exam, and that would open up a lot of doors directly through the school. They had companies that would recruit directly from the program. And that sounded great to me. I liked the idea of having a job before I graduate. So I was like, all right, I'm going to be an accounting major. It was really that simple. I didn't ever pray through anything at that point. I was not at that level of maturity, just being transparent. But God knows how to work things out. Holy Spirit's like this awesome navigation system. If you make one boneheaded decision or one non-consulting with the wisdom of God decision, then it'll just recalculate you back on the right path. So He's used that to open doors. So I went through, got my accounting degree, stayed for my master's, and I'm glad I stayed because I met my wife my first semester of graduate school, and went into the CPA world, did that for a little bit of time, and then I've worked in multiple different industries, from public companies, private companies, did some consulting work. Now I work for an e-commerce company remotely. So, I mean, the only thing I haven't covered is governmental. I've never worked for a municipality, but I've covered most of the other main industries. And along that, I learned skills that I was able to help other people out with, because a personal budget is no different than a business budget. It's usually got less zeros for most of us, a lot less zeros for most of us, but it's the same principles. So, learning what I do day to day, I'm able to help other people.
Now, are you still a CPA now?
Uh, Not to get too technical, but technically my status is inactive because I've not kept up my continuing education. So I'm still on the roster. I passed the exam. I have all the legal credentials. There's certain things that I wouldn't be able to do if I worked for like a public firm. But I'm actually part of my current boss. They would like for me to put together a plan to be active again in the next few years. So I am going to start that in January to get my credentials back to a current status. So that's a little technical, but I have to be careful with how I say that. I'm a CPA, but I have to say I'm currently in an inactive status.
Right. Well, that's like similar to myself. I'm a paramedic, but as of right now, I can't operate as one because I'm not underneath. I'm not actually actively working for a service. So therefore, I'm not under a med control. So I'm a
Yeah,
paramedic, but I'm not.
exactly. Yeah. I can't
So
sign a tax return or sign off on an audit statement. That's basically the main limitation, which I'm
right.
not doing that right now anyway. So it doesn't hinder me in any way.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, because I'm one of these kind of guys that I believe that as a Christ follower, and I think you and I kind of lean in the same direction when it comes to we lean a little bit more towards victorious eschatology,
Mhm.
and Christ establishing His kingdom in the earth, and us as Christ followers partnering with Him to do that. And one of the ways that that should be done is business or finances, the economy aspect of it. And it's one of those areas that the church really has not focused on in America.
Agreed.
Uh, can you kind of walk me through what are some of your thoughts as to why the church avoids finances in general and personal finances and accountability?
Well, gosh, there's many. I'll try to just list a few of the biggest ones to me. I think one of the biggest is there was for a long period of time in the fundamentalist movement, piety was viewed as poverty. That if I was poor of earthly things, then I was more pious, I was more holy, I was more righteous. You and I would probably both say that that's a very skewed misunderstanding of Scripture. Just the same as an excessive is a skewed understanding of Scripture. Whether that's you're living, you can say in the South high on the hog and you're not caring about other people, it's all about yourself, or if you're so putting others before yourself that you're not even taking care of your own household. In my opinion, both are sin. I think I can back that scripturally. So part of the history of the church is that you have people that grew up generation after generation thinking that they weren't supposed to make too much of themselves. They were supposed to be of meek and poor standing. And that was, again, in my opinion, a misapplication of scripture. That's one area I think the church, historically has had that come through. Another one is a lot of churches, we can tiptoe on the eschatology side. That's not the topic for the day, but you and I are of the victorious side. A lot of churches that are not of the victorious eschatology, that are more of a futurism, regardless which flavor, if your worldview is you think that the end is coming any day now, you don't have a legacy mentality. You're not thinking long term, generation after generation. You're thinking more short term. So if you are thinking in terms of resources, you're thinking short term, I'm putting resources into evangelism, I want to get people saved so they don't miss the rapture.
Right.
But not thinking in terms of building people, you're just thinking in terms of rescuing people. And that's only the first step. Getting people connected to the family is important, but I want
That's a
to build those
mouthful.
people. Yeah.
That's a mouthful. That one statement right there of the church is focused on rescuing people, not building people.
Yep. That's been the main emphasis. Like even
Wow.
I love the Brownsville revival. Like for those that were on the that are listening to this that have been a part of that, that was a wonderful move of the Lord. But it was by and large an evangelistic revival. It was more so about getting people saved, less so about other dynamics of the kingdom. And I think different moves of God have had different focuses, and there's nothing to knock that. But that's kind of been the main push of the church for the last however many decades you want to look at. There's been a lot more focus on just getting people saved, which is wonderful. But that's only a piece of the Great Commission. We're supposed to build people and do what? Teach them all that Christ taught his disciples. We're supposed to build people, as Paul said, into the fullness and the stature of Christ. Paul said, "Follow me as I follow Christ." Well, where's the replicating the Father's heart part if we're staying toddlers in the faith? And I think that's a big miss that the church hasn't really grasped that they're failing in. I don't think it's intentional. I think there's literally just ignorance of that facet of responsibility.
What's amazing, it's amazing to me what what an eschatological view would actually, the damage that it can do if you're pursuing one specific thought process. If my entire belief system is that within the next 20 years we're going to be gone and
Mm-hmm.
we're not here, well, at that point I'm not really worried about
Yep.
about anything after that. So it kind of makes me wonder what we as the church really need, what we really need to be focusing on. Walk me through your idea of what a healthy church, what it would look like with them teaching on personal finances? Like what kind of a, like we have one class that we teach here and we do it, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, but
Mhm.
I personally don't feel like it's enough. So what is something that a church should be doing in order to instill uh, biblical financial principles within their own people?
I think whether you do it as a course through the church, whether it's on like a Sunday night, Wednesday night, whatever, logistically works for the church, or if you do it through home groups, kind of depends on the structure of the church. But I think that level would probably be fine. I don't necessarily think it's best taught or preached from the pulpit just because of the details you need to get into, and there can be so much nuance with different people's situations. I really think it's best done in a smaller group where you can have dialogue and discussion and kind of really dig into the nuts and bolts. That's my personal opinion. From a small group setting, you can gauge where everybody's at. What stage of the process are they at? Are they in, they don't have a clue of anything of what they're doing and they need to just really gather information? Because the first step to coming up with a plan is you have to get your information to know what are the pieces to the puzzle. Others may be a little further along. Maybe they understand they're trying to pay down debt, but they don't have a clue on how to save. They don't know how to prepare for the future. They don't know about a will or life insurance or any of these other things that are a part of the overall process. So in a smaller group setting, you're able to have someone who is aware of these issues, whether that's, one of the pastors, just, somebody in the congregation who's abreast of these topics, who can kind of walk people through that, gauge where they're at, kind of figure out where they are, and then offer resources, whether that's a Dave Ramsey material or a Crown Financial. There's lots of good resources out there that can give practical tools, but the relational side helps people to, one, have a support system, because it can be overwhelming. If you first realize that your financial house is a dumpster fire, it can be very emotionally draining. And I've seen that. And part of that is you need the encouragement to say, look, you're taking practical steps to make this better. That's important. Like, we're going to celebrate that and we're going to encourage you through that. Don't get discouraged that you have so far to go. Be encouraged that you're at least doing something when so many people in the country are not taking that first step of responsibility. So the relational piece is crucial to success. It's absolutely crucial. I can give someone all the tools, but if they get discouraged, they're probably not going to keep following those tools. So I kind of want to put that out there first. Like, that is a very vital piece, which is why I don't think it can just be taught from a pulpit. You need relational support to walk it out.
Right. Because I mean, finances is one of those things that, in all honesty, unless somebody's being proactive and they're going after the education,
Yep.
there isn't much provided anywhere.
Yeah, it's not taught in the school system, that's for sure. I mean, I learned from my parents how to balance a checkbook. I was never taught that. Now, granted, I learned it with my college program because of the nature of my degree. I learned how to, you know, journal entries and balancing your check. I learned all the basics of budgeting and finance because that was my coursework. But if that's not your coursework, there's nowhere in the educational system that that's currently taught. Maybe in a few places here and there in some states that have changed their coursework, but at least for me, I was never taught that in any of the courses that I went through in elementary, middle school, or high school. I was taught how to type on a typewriter, which has done me no good in the modern age. It would have been great to learn about the basics of finance, but um, the other thought on that would be having the support system is important. Maybe even just having some of the books available. Like, if your church has, like, a little library or resource table, have, whether it's a Dave Ramsey book or whatever it is, just so that you have something available if the topic comes up. If you're in a counseling session, or if you're in a conversation and someone's like, hey, like, we really need help on this, like, we got to get out of debt, or we don't know what to do about this. Having resources available will be good as well from the church's perspective, as far as what they can do to be available. And not being afraid to ask the questions in relational conversations, like, hey, is there anything that's going on? And teaching and leading from example that it's okay to be humble. I'm not saying you open up your checkbook to everyone around you. I'm not saying
Right.
that, but leading by example, that it's okay to seek help when it comes to finances, because that, in the church especially, that seems to be like one of the most closed off topics that the body of Christ has. People get really, really, their back ends can get a little bit puckered
Right.
whenever the money word comes out. People get really fidgety about it. So showing that it's okay to be humble and say, look, like, I don't have it all figured out. Hey, I'm Pastor so and so, and I'm still working through a process that game plan that I put in place with some people to help me out.
I think some of that hesitancy to talk about it or actually to receive anything from it is because usually anytime that it's mentioned in a church or religious setting, it's often there's a hook there in
Oh yeah.
which we're going to talk about it so that you can give us something,
Mhm. Yep.
which causes us, as soon as it's mentioned, the red flags go up. Which there's definitely biblical precedents. There's definitely the principles of sowing and reaping that's involved.
Mhm.
However, it feels like often anytime finances come up, there's always that there's always that catch. Like you
Yeah.
have to make sure that you're giving. Make sure
Yeah.
that you're giving and giving and giving. So walk me through, if you were going to, because in all honesty, I would say that what would you say the percentage of people with an actual financial education, just a basic financial education, is within the church setting versus the world setting? Kind of walk me through some of this real quick.
It's probably no different. I think now that's a specific stat that I've not seen, so I can't say with certainty. Like, for instance, marriage statistics are not much different, unfortunately, within the church as well as outside of the church. Financially, not really sure, but overall, as far as in the U.S., I mean, people watching from other countries, I don't have any statistics available for your country, so this is going to be based on the U.S. Um, but anywhere from 63 to 78%, I saw different articles that use different numbers within that spectrum, but at least 63% of the country, they live paycheck to paycheck. So to anybody listening, and then you fit that category, like, don't be ashamed. Like, there's no shame speaking over you at all in this. It's one, you're not alone, not by a long shot. There's a lot of people that find themselves in the same situation. So taking that proactive step of, I'm going to get help, I'm going to get a plan together, I'm going to be proactive and trying to work my way out of this situation, you're already ahead of the game. Um, Tying that in with savings, only 42% of Americans, or 42% of Americans have less than 1,000 in savings. So like that's like one major car repair or one major medical bill that your insurance doesn't cover. So like those are some numbers there that just, I share that just to say, hey, look, like, you're not alone in this. If you're going to put a plan together, do you mind if I just go into some quick practical tips? I'll try
Go
to just
ahead. Go
shoot
ahead.
some out. I'll try to not speak these as quickly. So if anyone is trying to jot these down, they can have these, and I can send them to Bishop, and he can put them in maybe a little text box or something when this is
Yeah.
posted. We'll see what we can do there. Um, this is just going to be 7 quick tips on if you're just starting out and you need a plan. This will give you a blueprint for a plan that you could then work with in relationship with somebody. Step 1 is you have to gather your relevant data. You can't plan if you don't have the knowledge. So keys to your relevant data would be, what are your income streams, whether that's your paycheck, if you have anything else that you get money from, if you're like an entrepreneur, if you're in the gig community, wherever your money comes in from, that's your money coming in. Anywhere your money goes out, rent, utilities, food, gas, insurance, all that stuff. But don't just total up the numbers. Make sure you know when your money comes in, if you get paid once a week, if you get paid twice a month, and know when your bills are due. Because when the money comes in and when the money has to go out, that's this thing in the accounting what we call cash flow. If all of my money comes in at the end of the month, but all my bills are due at the end of the month, that's good if my money comes in before my bills are due. But if my bills are due before my money's coming in, I have to make sure I have enough before those bills are due to pay them. And that's what cash flow comes in. So the timing is important. That's one thing a lot of people miss. They're like, well, I make enough money every month, but the money doesn't come in when they need it. So you have to plan around those time gaps. 2, when you do that, try to map it out. Like on your calendar, if you know when you're going to get paid, get a calendar and go, okay, I'm getting X amount here. This amount is due there. Try to literally give you a visual if you're a visual person. Make yourself a chart to know when that happens. That'll help you out on your planning. Make a priority list. So let's say you get your information, you go, okay, I'm going to use easy math. Let's say you bring in $1,000 a month, but your bills are $1,300 a month. You know you have an immediate problem. You don't have enough money coming in versus what you have to pay out. So what you have to do is you got to look at your money going out and go, okay, what is absolutely vital? What do I have to have? You have to prioritize that. shelter, food, your most important things. And then you have to make those tough decisions. What can I cut? Now, yes, some people are going to say I absolutely don't have anything that's not a vital essential. So I understand everybody's in the same situation, but where you can cut, you have to make that decision. That's where your prioritization comes in. Even if there's nothing that you can cut, going through that step will help you in the future. As you're able to get margin in your budget, you'll have the mentality of, I will prioritize the most important things first, then add to that as I can. So that's the next step. And then do whatever is necessary within your power to lower your expenses and to increase your income. Try to, if you can, hit it from both angles. If you can cut anything at all, try to cut what you can. If you can go take a second job or do a gig or do whatever you can to increase your income to give yourself some margin. Margin just simply means I have more coming in than I have going out. That's the goal. You want to have margin so you have a little bit less stress. And set goals for paying down your debt as well as for savings. So let's say your first goal is, I want to pay off this, $500 bill. Set a goal for yourself that whenever you do pay that off, you're going to celebrate that because that's a milestone. Okay. So set aside a budget, whether that's $20 to go get a meal, or whatever it is within that's reasonable for your budget. Say, when I meet this goal, I'm going to celebrate that. Don't shortchange the celebration. You want to have positive reinforcement to encourage yourself. It's worth the hard effort in between. So, and have both shorter term goals and longer term goals. If you've got a mortgage, you're not paying that off in 6 months. And be realistic with yourself.
Come on.
You're going to have a longer term goal, like their bigger debts like that, but you can have shorter term goals as well. And you want to have some that are spread out where it's like, okay, your goal may not be to pay off an entire debt. It may be to take a chunk out of it. Have short term goals, mid-term goals, and long-term goals. Try to give yourself bite-sized things that you can do so that you're encouraging yourself as you accomplish success in the smaller things that are up front. Yeah. Okay. I think those are the main tips there on that. We can go into other practical stuff, but that's like, if you're just getting started, that's the stuff you got to do first. We can talk about longer term stuff as well, but that's the more essentials for like anybody and everybody can use that.
So I've heard you mention Dave Ramsey a few times. So yep. I'm going to imagine that you're a fan of Dave Ramsey.
I think there's good stuff there. I mean, I've read his book like once, and it's been years ago. I use the different material for small groups. Everybody's going to have their own kind of preference. I didn't ever do the envelope method. If anybody knows about Dave Ramsey and the envelope method, I didn't do that. What I would say is Dave Ramsey is very anti-credit cards, and understand why. Because a lot of people don't have the willpower to refrain their spending. If you have to know yourself. So again, everybody has to know their own personality and their own willpower. If you can treat your credit card like a debit card, that's different. If you know that if you have a credit card, you're going to spend too much, then yeah, go ahead and cut it up. Like you have to make that decision yourself based on knowing your spending habits. If you have to put cash in an envelope to visually see where your money's going, do it. Do what works for you. I personally still have a credit card. I pay it off every single week. And every time I get paid, pay it down. And I don't overspend. I use it for my regular expenses. I use it for my groceries, use it for my gas, and then just pay it off. But I'm the personality type. It's not a temptation for me to go and overspend. Others, it might be. So maybe that's not the best usage for them to do it. Maybe they need to use a debit card. Maybe they need to use checks, whatever works for them. And I know that is one thing that Dave Ramsey is very adamant on. So I'm not going to say I'm a total fan. But I think the principles that he's trying to teach people are good. I think the meat of it, anyone can use.
Okay. All right. Well, let's look at someone who is just getting started out.
Yep.
If you've got somebody who, let's take a young couple who's just getting started. They're getting married. They're trying to decide how they're going to handle the finances. Are they one account, two accounts? Her bills, his bills, whole night. Like, walk me through from a financial coach's opinion. What advice would you give this couple?
The first advice I would give them is that everything isn't his or hers; it's yours. The two are going to become one, so you need to have a unified perspective. So part of that is they need to discuss their priorities. They need to discuss their values and how they look at money. You could have, because sometimes opposites attract. You could have a spendthrift and someone who spends like a drunken sailor, to use an old cliche. Well, if there are two people coming at money from two completely different paradigms, they need to discuss that before setting a budget, in my opinion. You got to understand where each party is coming from, also their upbringings. One person may have come from a lot. They have a different thought for their lifestyle or their standard of living versus someone who came from more humble beginning or humble means. That's also going to be pivotal in what they consider a priority, an essential versus a luxury. So having those conversations prior to putting the numbers on a piece of paper, I think is important because you've got to understand how do you really define with each other now as one party, as one team, what do we call a priority? What do we call a luxury? What are our most important values that we want to steer our planning with? And I think that's very important, understanding the background, etc. I was fortunate. My wife's dad is also an accountant.
Oh
so
wow.
so we had a lot of similarities, her dad and I, and how we view things, very conservative, very frugal. So it was obviously very easy for me. My wife was like, "Well, you know what you're doing. All right, let's go through and sit down, and I'm going to trust you to kind of do the logistics." But we had the same perspective, we had the same worldview. It was a lot easier. That's not always going to be the case. So that's why I say that step needs to come before actually writing out a budget. Is you've got to get on the same page first. Otherwise, you're just going to be butting heads, and it's going to be frustrating and stressful, and it can cause friction in the marriage. Money is the number one factor for divorce, not infidelity. So getting on the same page is just so crucial, especially starting out. And if you're not going to have really high paying jobs and you're going to have to live tight for a little while, you really need to get on the same page before you dive into that part of your marriage because it can be stressful. There's no two ways around it. I mean, you can be happily married and broke, and you got to choose to stay happily broke and not
Right.
let the stress kill you. So that'd
That's
be the first thing. And then, yeah, then it'd be the same steps. It'd be okay, who's got what in terms of their profession, where they're bringing money in. And that may also help them to determine what type of residence they want to have. Okay, well, this is what our budget will allow. We're bringing an X amount. Okay, can we get a house? No, probably not. Maybe we need to get an apartment. So having your priorities helps you to determine that. What's the most important to you? Is it location? Is it the size of your residence? Those factors come into play and what you can and cannot afford. Uh, there's ratios that you can look at. I would personally advise nobody ever spend more than 50% of their income on their housing because then you just start to run into real pinches in other areas of your utilities, your insurance, your food. You don't really have much wiggle room for giving and for paying down debt and for saving. So you got to think in terms of a pie. The bigger that piece is for your housing, because that is the biggest piece for most people, how much that piece is dictates how much is left for all these other areas that you still have as part of your budget.
right. So walk me through and walk some of those who are watching through this idea. Um, it's not the American dream: buy a house, buy a house, buy a house, buy a house. However, it's not always wisdom
Yeah.
to go and
Right.
buy a house. Sometimes it's actually smarter to rent
Yeah.
where you're at. And sometimes it's more beneficial financially for you to rent. So kind of walk me through some of the differences between um, how does a person know when they should be renting versus buying, or what kind of a benefits
Mhm.
there may be.
Well, first, I just want to rebuff the American understanding of what buying a house is because most of us use the term and we're using it incorrectly. Just to remind everybody, you're not buying a house, you're getting a mortgage, which means you're getting a debt obligation. The asset is not yours, it is whoever your lender is. You don't own your home until they give you the title when you pay off your loan. That's the same for your car. So, right now, technically, I do not own my car because I haven't completely paid off the loan. I may have equity in it. I may have more
Right.
paid off than it may be worth more. But I just want to say that right off the bat because a lot of people are like, "Oh, we went and bought a house." I'm like, "No, you didn't. You went and got a debt. You went and
Right.
signed a debt obligation. You literally signed into debt." So the biggest thing there is people have to understand you're not buying a home unless you're writing a check for it, and only maybe 0.01% of people out there are actually buying a house. Most everyone is getting a mortgage, no matter how wealthy they are. So I got to put that out there first. Just that misconception, I think, bothers some people, because what happens then is if you jump into that too quickly, like you're saying, when's the right time? If you jump into it too quickly, people have this mentality, well, that's my house, even though you don't own it. So then if something happens and you have to turn over your house or you have to sell your house to get out of an issue financially, it has a different emotional attachment for people. Think back to the housing bubble in 2008. A lot of people got really mad saying, oh, well, so and so lost their house. It's like, I'm not saying that it was a fair scenario. Don't mishear me, but
Right.
what I'm saying is it wasn't their house. That's, again, that misconception can cause this emotional attachment that then can be a hindrance to us to then make better, prudent decisions moving forward, because we have a negative emotional attachment to a previous financial experience.
Right.
As far as knowing when, I would say this: one, you got to know what kind of interest rate you're going to get. You got to know your credit score. You can find that out for free. There's tons of apps out there that will give you your credit score for free without it being a ding. A lot of financial institutions include that as part of their debit cards and credit card programs. Mine does. I can track my financial score. It's just part of my Capital One credit card plan. So I can know what my credit score is. That lets you know where you fall in the interest range, because your interest rate makes a dramatic difference of your monthly payment. So using, again, just easy numbers, if you're getting $100,000 home and you're having to, let's ignore down payments. Let's just say you're going to finance 100%. You're not putting anything down on the house. You're going to get a $100,000 house and your interest rate is going to be 5%. Okay. Well, if you don't have good credit to get 5%, and let's say your interest rate is going to be 7.5%, that means your interest is going to be significantly higher, especially over the long run, on your monthly payment. And if you don't put a down payment on, they have this thing called PMI. It's basically insurance to cover the fact that you didn't put a down payment on. That all
Right.
adds up. So if you're looking at what is my current rent rate, then you can go and do an estimate and go, okay, well, if I look at this price point house with X amount of a down payment, what will my monthly payment be with my actual mortgage payment? Because it's not just the principal and interest to the lender, it's also your insurance and potentially that PMI if you don't have enough of a down payment. So it can get more complicated. I'm not a mortgage lender, so I don't want to overcomplicate this, but you also have variable rate interest, you have fixed interest, you can do a 15-year, you can do a 30-year. All of that will dictate what those numbers look like. Personally, I would never advise someone to get a variable rate interest loan. That's not me saying that as a professional. That's me saying that as a just an individual, because what can happen is if we get into a weird economy like we're currently in and interest rates start to go up, you can get in a bind extremely quickly if you are not able to adjust the rest of your spending. Fixed interest, at least you know that part of your budget's not going to change. So that's one piece of advice I would give when you're looking at that process. The other thing is you have to understand it's a very long-term commitment. If you are in a position where you may be moving again in a short period of time, or you have some other life scenario that dictates you're most likely not going to be here longer term, I don't think it's prudent to buy, because if you go and get a mortgage and then 2 years later you have to relocate, well, now you have to find housing where you're moving to, and you have to go through the selling process, which may not be instantaneous. You don't want to have two payments at one time. There's very few people that have enough margin in their budget where that won't destroy their finances very quickly. If you have to go rent somewhere and you're still paying a mortgage until the house sells, that's going to be trouble,
Right.
real serious trouble. So like military have to deal with that a lot. It's hard for military people to go and get a mortgage just because when they have to relocate, if the timing doesn't work out with them selling their home, they can be in a pinch really quick.
Okay. So let's look at let's look at emergency funds.
Yeah.
Thought process on for a young couple, older couple, as we're moving along in life. I know some suggest a 3 month, some suggest a 6 month.
Yeah.
What's your
Got to
thought?
start somewhere. Yeah, I think the first step for anybody, I honestly think even before you try to start paying off debt, you want to have $1,000 in an emergency fund. And this is why. If you don't have any savings and you're trying to pay down your debt, anything can come up and you're right back to square one. You're actually probably going to be in worse shape because you're going to have to go into more debt to pay off whatever that situation was. $1,000 may not pay every scenario. It may not pay off every medical bill that may pop up. It may not pay every car repair that pops up, but it's a good starting point. I think that is good advice that Dave Ramsey gives, because if you've got $1,000 saved up and you then start to try to pay down debt and you have a car repair pop up, you have your cushion that's not going to immediately hit your monthly budget. You're not having to go back to the credit card or go get a loan from the bank to be able to pay your repair. Because for most people, your car is how you can go earn your income. For most people, I know we're a little different now, a lot more work from home, but that's still a very common scenario. People need their cars. So that first starting point is 1,000. I think after 1,000, you want to try to have your next goal be 1 month's worth of expenses. So that way, if anything happens and you're not able to bring income in for a month, you at least know you have 1 month covered before you're going to be in a real bind. Then from 1 month, go to 3 months. I think at 3 months, you then want to start expanding to being more aggressive with your debt payoff if you're not debt free at that point, and to start looking at actually investing and saving. Now, there are people that are extremely conservative and they say, well, I want to have 6 months worth of savings. That's fine. I think at that point, between 3 to 6 months, it's what is your personality towards how risk averse are you? Then you also can throw in the spiritual side of, well, now are you depending on your money or are you depending on your God? There's prudence, but then there's also where it can start to become an idol. And I think everybody again, there's a little bit of this personal relationship with the Lord of where's your wisdom on this? Like if I go too far down, having just building up savings, am I going to start leaning on my savings really more so than trusting God as my provider? And I think that's, for me, I found the sweet spot was I want to have 3 months worth of savings. Then I want to start hitting up other targets after that. That was my approach. So like, I've got my 3 months savings and I'm paying off more aggressively. Like I had to go replace my car that was older than my career. So I went and got a car loan and I'm now paying that down. And I'm doing some other savings towards some other longer term goals and, investing for the future, that sort of thing. So that was where I found the sweet spot of comfort of, I still know it's totally up on God for my provision, but I want to use wisdom to say, if life throws me a major curveball, we got 3 months that we're not going to be in a bind. That's where I settled.
Right. Well, I think again, looking at the fact that most people go through life without any kind of a financial education at all.
Yeah.
You start mentioning you start mentioning it might be smarter for you to rent versus to buy. People are automatically going to have to deal with this concept of, wait a minute, the American dream is I need to buy a house and own a house, and then we start looking at it and saying, okay, you also need to have some kind of an emergency fund, which could be difficult for people who are living that paycheck to paycheck, not having enough month at the end of the money, and then looking at, well, go get another job, add a job to it when they're already struggling to get to work and do the. I hate to say it, but the economy that we live in at the moment is not much different from the economies in time past. I think most of the issue comes into play with us just living way outside of our means.
And that's true. And I will say this, the last year in particular, we have seen inflation spike like we haven't seen in 30 to 40 years. So there's an element of the current situation that has hit people faster than you can adjust. So look, again, no shame on anybody. Like there is an element of this that is out of your control. And that's where you want to have these savings in place to give you room as you have to adjust your life as things like this occur. But yes, to put it bluntly, in the last 40 years, I would say in particular, as we've become more materialistic as a society, including the church, people have just not been able to tell themselves, nor their loved ones, nor their kids, this famous 2-letter word called no. And it starts with the self, and then it's that circle. We just can't tell ourselves no. We got to go get the newest iPhone. We got to go have this, whatever it is, whatever. Everybody's got their own little, things. But, if we choose to live like the world lives, talking about the body of Christ right now, we're dimming our own light, because if the world looks at us and says, well, you're saying you have this great this is the way to live your life. Like you've got, Jesus is the way, and you're supposed to be this beacon shining light. But we're living just the same as anyone else when it comes to different facets. We always think of that as like, oh, well, we don't look any different because we're sinning like them. Well, this is going to hurt some toes. And again, this isn't a shameful thing. This is just to try to raise awareness. So please understand my heart. If we're living like financial fools, we're still sinning like them. I know that is a tough pill to swallow, but that's even to churches. If churches are doing the same thing, everything's going to the wrong priorities. Do we think that impresses the world? Do we think that they see the heart of the Father in that? I don't think so. I mean, that's why for me, building the principles and helping people to understand how to live prudently, that is an aspect of showing them the heart of the Father. I can't be generous to a world in need if I have nothing to give.
Right.
Well, I have to build up something to give to have it to give. And I think that's the piece that we've missed. We've wanted to be able to give, but we've not thought through, well, how do I practically do that? It's not if I win the lottery, I'm going to go be generous. I need to be generous before I win the lottery. Otherwise, when I win the lottery, I'm going to spend money the same way I've always spent money. And it's not going to be to help people. It's going to be whatever I've been spending my money on.
Right. Now that's a difficult concept or thought process for smaller churches to grasp a hold of. When every dime that they have coming in through offering is going out to
Yeah.
just manage the day-to-day expenses. So what would you consider to be a healthy way for a church to actually talk about it and present it to their people and say, hey, because we're not, again, we lean very heavily towards victorious eschatology. There is no such
Mm-hmm.
thing as a required percentage that we have to give to the Lord. Everything that we own belongs to him. So we give out of obedience.
Mm-hmm.
But what would you consider to be, as someone who deals with finances professionally and someone who is a member of the church at large and who is actively seeking another church to connect to locally, what's a healthy way for a church to present to their people? Hey, we need you to be obedient, because without your obedience, we can't fulfill the call.
Yeah, I think one, it's transparency. I've been a part of bigger churches. I've been a part of smaller churches, and I will say this very clearly from conversations I've had with people. Most people's issue is when they don't think the money's going where they think it should go, and that's legitimate. If I'm giving money that I work hard for, that the Lord's put in my hands to steward, I want to see it going to impact the world, not just to build a bigger building. And I think a lot of the Western world, too much of church's priorities, and this isn't speaking to any one particular church, I'm talking about in generally, the emphasis has been on building the local little C church, and there's not been enough focus, at least not communicated to the members of that congregation, of how they're building the kingdom through those finances. So I think that could be as simple as being transparent with, hey, Veritas has a budget. Guess what? We allocate X amount of the budget to go towards local missions, international, whatever it is. But communicating clearly, look, we are doing what we can with your resources to make an impact for the kingdom. Yes, X amount is to, have a light bill paid. Those, because if people are coming, they want the building to have the lights on. That's okay to tell people.
Right.
And if people appreciate the services and that they're being fed, just being transparent and saying, look, we're not living high on the hog. We're not trying to build a huge building. We're wanting to reach our community, but these are things that we have to do that. Otherwise, we have to look at other means to do it. And I think that most people that are actively a part of a congregation have the heart to see that ministry continue on. They want to invest in that. I think the issue is more in the larger churches. Again, this is just from my experience, where people aren't seeing the impact. They're seeing it go in places they don't necessarily think it should. And I think that's where the disconnect comes in. In terms of how do you address the giving, I think offering the resources to help people and let them know, look, yes, we want you to give generously. Like the Apostle Paul said, we want you to believe and to invest in the sowing and reaping principles of the kingdom. We also want to give you practical tools so that you can feel more successful in that process, that you know what you're doing. That way you're getting both sides. It's a longer term approach from the church perspective. you're going to benefit more in the long run of people being able to have the means to be generous if they learn how to manage their own finances better. Because if the emphasis is only on getting from the people in the short term, but they don't know how to manage their money as a wise steward, they're going to run out, and then now the church is going to run out. That makes sense. It's the
Right.
same difference between legacy thinking and short term thinking. You want to invest in the people of time and resources so they know how to do things well, and they have more to give, and you can do both at the same time. But I think that's where there's been a disconnect with a lot of churches is they focus on the getting and they don't really grasp that. Well, the people don't know how to steward. They can't reach the threshold from being a decent steward to being a generous steward if they don't know how to steward.
Right.
Parable of the
Right.
talents.
Yeesh. That's a sometimes that's a tough one for people to actually grasp a hold of. I was thinking about that not too long ago, because when we look at the fact that the master had given some, gave more to one guy, a little bit to another guy, and then just a small amount to one. When he didn't take care of that small amount with wisdom, he took it away
Mhm.
from him.
Yep.
Took it away from him, which I think personal opinion points to the fact that um, when we learn how to steward what we've been given,
Mhm.
then we'll see growth. And it's not until we learn to steward that, and if we're
Mhm.
not careful, if we're not stewarding it well, that will be taken away from us, and a smaller amount will be given until
Yeah.
we learn how to steward that, and then it'll be added
Yeah.
on top of it.
Agreed.
That's painful for some people.
Yes, but I want to put a positive spin on that because I want to be clear. Hey, this is a challenge. Like this is a maturity process. Like if you want to mature in the Lord, you can't ignore this, but for so long. But the positive side of that is this is if we want to replicate the Father's heart, the he's the biggest giver ever. I mean, he gave to us before we could ever think to give to him. So part of our joy of being a believer is showing the world what our papa's like. Well, I want to be able to do that. So I want to learn how can I do that? Well, I've got to learn how to manage well because my dad manages well. If
Right.
I'm going to learn to give well because my dad gives well, and it's a learning process. So I think when people, and that's why I would say is as soon as you can in your process, even if it's $5 a month, set aside a budget or set aside a piece of your budget to be a giver. And if you can only do $5 to start with, learn the joy in giving the $5. I mean, people think too big. They think, oh well, if I can't give 100 doesn't mean anything. No, no,
Right.
no, 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 no. Fish in the loaves. Give what you have, he'll multiply it.
Right.
And that has to be emphasized. Too many churches focus on the big legacy gifts. They focus on the big offerings. And I don't think enough emphasis is placed on the biggest gift is from the heart, not
Right.
the most zeros. And I think the more people that can really grasp that and understand, like, that's the heart of the Father, he's looking at your heart. He's not looking at your bank account because when he gets your heart, he can bless it. But he
Right.
wants your heart to be healthy because he doesn't want to give you more responsibility than you have the wisdom and the maturity to handle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hey, we've been talking for over an hour now. Um,
It's been great.
doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
Um, but I want to go ahead. We've got a few people who are still watching, hanging out with us. I want to
Yeah.
go ahead and open the floor up to them if they have a question,
Yeah.
um,
Sure.
in which they can go ahead and comment with your questions. Throw it out there. Anything that you may have that you would like to see Josh answer, go ahead and post them in the feed, and we will. I'll throw them up here for Josh to take a look at. And usually it takes a couple of minutes before they start showing up because Facebook, the live lags behind
Got
what we're talking about for a little while. But if you've got a question, go ahead and throw it up there. Josh will take a couple of questions. We'll take a few minutes and answer some of those things and kind of dive into it.
it.
Um, and we'll kind of go from there.
Or wait on some of those to pop up. One thing I did want to share, just because a mutual friend of ours, if you remember Matt Hester.
Yes.
I'm not going to go into the family details. I'm just going to say within his sphere of family connections, uh, there were individuals who didn't plan ahead for their life, and I'm just going to use this as an example of something we didn't touch on, and that's life insurance. At some point within your financial plan, you want to call it income protection. That's the phrase that I would use. So I look at it this way: if I'm alive, cool. If I'm dead, I'm in heaven. I'm good, but I'm leaving behind people that were depending on me. So I wanted to make sure that I budget, and I do this. I have enough budgeted of life insurance, and I'm personally a term fan. I'm with Dave Ramsey on that. I'm not going to go into the details of that because there's two different camps within the insurance community. I don't want to start any fights. I'm just saying, for me, the most important thing is you're thinking of the what if. You don't want it to happen, but if something happens, especially if you're in a scenario where one spouse or one partner, if you're coming into a marriage, or if you're already in a marriage and one person is working, the other person's not, or one person's making significantly more than the other, whatever. If I were to not be able to bring in income, it would make a significant difference on the monthly budget for my wife, right? So I have enough life insurance that if I end up dying at a premature state, she's good. It's a nest egg for her to where if she needed to retire, because for whatever reason, she couldn't work again, she could. That's the level that I have. Now, not everyone can start at that point, but I'm using that as a principle to put in someone's thought, just to think, if something happened to me or to the other working spouse, subtract that money from your budget and look and see what would happen. For
Right.
the vast majority of people, you're not going to have enough. So the
Right.
goal of life insurance in its purest form is, if something happens, you have enough money to come in to sustain the household until you can reacclimate to your new normal. That's the
Correct.
smallest version. I went above and beyond that and said, if something happens to me, I want my wife to have an immediate retirement nest egg so that she has no worries, because
Right.
I was able to do that. That's not the starting point, but I worked my way to that point. But just want to throw that out there. We didn't talk about life insurance. I just want to plant that thought for people to consider that in that process of putting together their plan, so that they don't come in a situation where someone does unfortunately leave the earth early, and then the family's having to figure out, what are we going to do now, because it makes a
Right.
major change. So just want to throw that out
Right.
there. We'll wait for a question.
Well, hey, I appreciate you throwing it out there because um, our dear friend Gary would shoot me if he found out that we talked about money and I didn't. And the fact that I'm also a licensed life insurance
Yes.
agent,
Yeah. Yeah.
if we didn't talk about it, it's funny because you're a term. I prefer whole and IULs, but again, that's just preference,
The
preference and what you're
major
trying
thing
to
is have
accomplish.
protection. The biggest thing is have protection. I won't get into the nuances. There's no reason to get into the nuances on this. That's not the topic for today. But the biggest thing is have protection for your family.
Right. All right.
If
So we
you
do
can put
have
that, yeah,
a few questions for you.
cool.
My daughter is asking, Mr. Josh, what's your favorite verse and why? And that's Esther is asking that question.
It's tough to pick one. I guess I would go with. I'm going to paraphrase this because there's multiple verses in that conversation, and that's when Jesus is talking to the disciples about, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and the Father are one. I would say the reason why is because one of the biggest revelations that I had was when it dawned on me that the most common thing that Jesus referred to God as, we have all these names for God in the Old Testament, was Father. And I think one of the preeminent revelations of Jesus coming to the earth wasn't just to show everyone this is what God's really like. It was to specifically show us that God is Father. And beyond that, he's our Father.
Right.
It's like, so I think that piece of that conversation in the Gospel of John where it's recorded, I think, is just pivotal to understanding, in my opinion, one of the most overlooked parts of the gospel, and that is, you're not just getting saved from something, you're being brought into the life of someone. So
Right.
I'll leave it at that. version. I won't go too much into that. That's an easy topic to just ramble on
That could lead into another hour-long conversation.
easily.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Esther, if you want to look it up and read it, it can be found in John chapter 14, I believe. So
It's
John
before you get
chapter
into the
14.
I'm the vine. It's just before the I'm the vine, you're the branches part. Yeah.
All right. Pastor Maria has a question. How much does medical debt impact your credit, and how do you begin to resolve it?
There's variations there depending on different medical facilities, like whether it's a hospital or primary care or ambulance services. They can have different ways that they do debt collections. It also depends on whether it was connected or not connected to your health insurance, if you have health insurance. So there's some variations there that you'd have to look into. It will impact your credit. Unfortunately, despite our government passing legislation that removed, well, basically they said if you're going to have student loan debt, that can be a part of bankruptcy. Used to. Then once the government merged into some of the student loan stuff, they said that that's no longer part of personal bankruptcy. Right now, and I'm hoping that Congress will change this, but right now, yes, medical debt uh, it can impact you in a bankruptcy process. In other words, it's not excluded. And there's probably a lot of people. There's roughly in 2021 there were 400,000, just under 400,000 personal bankruptcy filings. I don't know how many of those were predominantly due to medical, but it's always, I won't say always, but it's very largely connected to medical. People don't have insurance. Some catastrophe occurs. Um, Unfortunately, that is the case. Now, how do you resolve it? You can contact the creditor and try to establish a payment plan. You can do that directly, or you can research. I don't have the name off the top of my head, but there are companies, there are nonprofit companies, just like people that help you pay down credit card debt or other debt. There are some that specifically try to resolve medical debt. If it was me, I would Google and try to find a reputable one of those to work with to try to use their leverage to get a easier payment plan and then work at it from there.
Okay. Now I know personally because I did actually take the Dave Ramsey class years ago. My wife and I ended up in a situation where when we first got married, we had zero debt, and then we started a business, bought a house, got a whole bunch of equipment, a whole bunch of. We ended up in like $250,000 worth of debt in a matter of like 3 years, and
Mhm.
then 2008 hit, and
Yeah.
because I wasn't prepared well enough. And I didn't have the marketing set up correctly for my business. We lost everything. We actually ended up homeless. So,
Mhm.
um, one of the things that we had learned through that process, if your medical debt has already hit collections, then
Mhm.
what is ended up happening is whoever that original debt was with, they've already taken a loss. They've already taken a
So,
loss on it because it's already been sold.
mhm.
So what you're no longer dealing with the hospital. You're no longer dealing with the ambulance service. You're now dealing with a third party who bought that debt for a percentage
Mhm.
which was much lower than what you owed. So if you owed, say, $100,000, they may have bought that for less than $10,000, and the original owners of that debt wrote that off as a loss. So they got a tax deduction for that. So you can actually um, personal deal. I'm not telling anybody to do this. This is what I would do personally is I wouldn't even negotiate with them to begin with. I wouldn't even talk with them to begin with. I would let them sit on that debt that they just purchased and they just bought. Let it stir and percolate with them for a little while, and then after they get frustrated enough, because if it's gone to collections, you didn't have the money to pay it to begin with. You didn't
Mhm.
even have the ability to work out some kind of a deal. So it's already gone. So it's already there. Your credit is already jacked when it hit that. So you're not damaging yourself any longer by letting it play out. So let it play out for a little while. Then go to the table with them. If they say that you owe $100,000, or if they say that you owe whatever it is, offer them 25% and say that you want to pay it in full. They're not going to take 25%. But I can guarantee you that the moment that you say, "Hey, I'll give you 20%, or I'll give you 25% on 25 cents on the dollar," they know, okay, this guy's actually going to negotiate with us.
Mhm.
He wants to get this clear. He wants to do this. They're going to tell you no right off the bat. Hang up on them. Give them another month, give them another 2 months. When they pick back up, say, hey, look, I've already offered y'all a percentage on this. Y'all weren't willing to take it. What would you take to
Hmm.
say this is paid in full? They may go all the way down. They may go all the way down to 40, 30% on the dollar, but you're not going to know unless you try it. Your credit's already jacked. So work with them on it, try it, and you can actually get that paid off, at which point they're still making money
Hmm.
because they didn't pay $100,000 for that debt. They're
Oh yeah.
still making money on it, and they're making money in two different ways. They're making money off what you just paid them, and because
Hmm.
you didn't pay the total amount, they're also taking a deduction on it. So
Hmm.
they're making money both sides of that equation. So if it's already gone there, don't be so quick to jump and say, okay, I've got to fix this right now. Tomorrow's a brand new day. Your credit's already jacked. It's okay. Breathe, breathe, and
Yeah.
negotiate with them. So just
Just don't plan on getting any loans for a while,
right, right,
because like I said, your credit's already shot at that point.
yeah. So, but don't feel stressed like I got to handle this right now today, which most of your debt collectors, they are trained to get an emotional response from you, and that
Mhm.
emotional response is they want you to start paying on it. They're going to do everything they can to scare you. They're going to do everything they can to make you feel like an utter failure so that they can get you to do something.
Yeah.
They've got a quota they've got to meet every single day, and they don't care how they meet it. So
Yeah.
just
Taking that big breath and just realizing, like, look, the damage is already done. Uh,
right.
It stinks as it may. The damage is done. Get a plan together. Yep. There you go.
So just take it one day at a time. All right, here's another one. How do you judge how much life insurance is needed?
Okay. So this is where you and I may have differing perspectives based on what type of insurance you use. You're going to have different ratios. For me, um, I would say this also depends on your situation, what you're able to do in terms of your budget. So the biggest piece is you have to know what your health will allow. In other words, if you have there's certain conditions that certain insurance companies won't insure, but others will. So kind of figuring out knowing what your health background is important. What's in your family history, all that will factor in. Unfortunately, just like it does with health insurance, it factors in with life insurance. Some companies will specialize in certain categories because that's their niche. Others won't insure it. They will. That's where they make their money. So that not being considered, because that's going to diversify way too much with everybody based on your health background. If you don't have any issues in terms of coverage, of insurability, as they call it in the insurance business, you want to first make sure you have enough to cover bare. I would say it's not worth getting if you can't cover at least 1 year's worth of income. So let's say your household earns $50,000 a year combined. You want to have 50K on each working individual. I'm going to just say two spouses, but I mean, you may have a household where you got multiple people living in multiple generations, but I'm just trying to keep it simple. Let's say you got husband and wife, both work, put 50K insurance for both of them. I would say do term because it's typically going to be the most affordable for people that are early on. I don't think whole life insurance is very reasonable to get enough coverage if you don't have a lot of money to work with, just because the rates are going to be higher. There's other benefits to whole that factor in, but in terms of having the affordability of the coverage, it's usually going to be a higher rate. 9 times out of 10, your term is going to be a lot cheaper because it's a different purpose. Another topic. We can talk about that another day. Um, if you're at a point where you're at a further along this budgeting process, for me, my goal was anywhere from 7 to 10 years worth of income, because if I was able to do that with interest rates and just knowing investing, if I was able to do that, then that was an immediate retirement nest egg for my wife. So for me, I went with a higher threshold because I was able to do that now. I didn't start that way. I started off much smaller amounts, and then I would redo a policy periodically as I was able to do more. So ultimate goal for me was I wanted to have a term policy that would last from now until my retirement age, that if anything happens to me before I have my retirement ready for retirement, where I'm then self-insured, if you will, I have enough retirement to last us. I wanted to have enough that if something happens to me or to her, that the other one is now retirement ready financially. That was my goal, but I had to work to that point.
Right. Gary's real big into term life also. He loves it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to me, And, and let me just say this. I used to be licensed in insurance. I basically only helped a few individuals that were relationship connections. I wasn't out there trying to sell on a regular basis. So I'm not in the camp of any particular one or whatever. I would look at each couple, whether it's a couple or an individual, look at their situation and go, what best fits their needs. That's my opinion. I don't think it's good to necessarily be hardcore bandwagon one way or the other.
Right.
For some people, it may make sense to do it one way. That makes sense for others to do another. For most people that I've helped in this process of trying to get to financial freedom, for most of them, term made more sense because they simply couldn't get enough coverage if they were to go whole based on
Right.
the rates. That's just for most people. But
You have to. Yeah, I think you touched on it right to begin with when you were talking about. You really have to determine what your goals are with it. What's your purpose for it? What are you trying to provide for if something happens to you?
mhm,
And then kind of go from there. You had term life. Term life pays out less than 1% of the time. Just the way that it works. When you're working and you're buying insurance, you have to understand you are gambling with the insurance company,
mhm.
and 99.99% of the time they're going to win. So, which we want them to if we're buying term life. Like
Yeah,
we
and
want them
I
to
use it
win.
as a what if. Exactly. For me, it's a
Right.
what if. If
Right.
if I can't make it to this point, I'm paying a little bit for what if to where my family's going to be okay. The
Right.
goal is to outlive it for me.
Right.
My goal
Absolutely.
is to retire and not need it. So
It's a
yeah,
gamble I hope to lose.
it's two different purposes. For me, I separated insurance what if scenario versus investing. I separated the two, and I said this is to cover if we don't get to this point, and we're going to invest for the future, independent of that. And for those who want to look at more, whole life is a little bit different in terms of how you can kind of merge some of the two together. So again, different purposes, different goals,
That's a
different
whole
products,
different conversation.
whole different
Whole
conversation.
different
Exactly.
conversation. That in and of itself could take 6 hours to go through. We don't
Yeah, I
have
mean, we
we
had
don't
to
have that.
study for how long to get our licenses?
It was fun. It was a lot
Yep.
of fun.
Yep.
I miss selling it. I really do. I haven't sold it in probably 2 years now, and I miss selling it. So I've played around with the idea of maybe getting back into it next year sometime. We'll see. I don't know. I don't know. We'll see what happens to us. All right. Next question. What are your thoughts on consolidating debt, for example, through places like a clear credit business?
Uh, there's there's going to be nuance to that. I think part of it depends on what type of debt. So you got different types of debt. Like we talked about, there's mortgage debt. Typically, any kind of consolidation of debt is either going to be consumer debt, i.e., credit cards, or similar to credit cards, whether that's with a specific vendor or your general credit card. Um, Student loans are kind of their own category now. So, like, I would say this: student loans, you got to look at what the interest rates are, and it's how much do you have. So for me personally, I had student debt for my master's program that I went through. The total amount wasn't a huge amount for me at the time, thankfully. So I just paid off my loan, and I just paid it off relatively quickly. That was my first main debt that I paid off. That was my first snowball target. If you're a Dave Ramsey person, mine was my student loan. Paid that off first because it was a higher interest rate than my
Right.
car loan was because the rates were higher. So you want to look at what are the different rates and what are the different amounts because those consolidations, you want to make sure it's actually going to benefit you. Now, if you're using a third party that is reputable, BB, triple B, or it's recommended by like someone like a Dave Ramsey or whatever, and it's like they're actually doing it to help people and they're not doing it to make money, then yes, they're most likely going to do it for your benefit. But you need to vet them because some places out there are doing it for them to make money, not just to help you. So you want to do your research on the company for starters. And if you don't have multiple different pieces going into it, it may not benefit you as much as just doing like the snowball effect of pick one, knock it out, and then accelerate to the next one.
Right.
Because if you consolidate multiple things together and it ends up raising your overall interest rate, you now have a higher amount. So you want to make sure the numbers work for you and not against you. And I don't want to get too technical on that. I'm not going to assume anybody knows all this financial stuff. So I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can. It's going to depend on the person. If you have two loans, consolidating is probably not going to help you that much. If you've got 20 different credit cards, you may want to try to go a route of not debt consolidation, but like just getting stuff cleared off, period. And I can't remember the name of the company, but Dave Ramsey did reference one company that they actually specifically help people to just get a bunch of credit card debt cleared off because it's the easiest to get just done. Like you talked about, companies will buy off other debt. Some of the first stuff that goes with is credit card debt. Credit card
Right.
companies make money two different ways. They make a lot on the interest to the individual, you, me, whomever, but they make transaction fees anytime any business ever uses their platform. They're not going to go broke letting off some of their debt because they've already made money multiple ways before it comes in. So, may not directly answer your question, but that's a tough one to say if it's for sure going to be good. I'm not familiar personally with Clear Credit, so I can't speak to their reputation. If they're reputable, they have good reviews on BBB, they're probably going to be actually able to help you out. I would just make sure I thoroughly vet somebody because unfortunately there are companies out there that are now mimicking the good ones just so that they can make money.
Right. And I'd add on top of that that if you don't deal with the destructive habits that got you into the situation
Oh yeah,
to begin with, just getting it fixed this one time isn't going to fix it. You're gonna walk right back into the situation that you were in previously.
absolutely.
All right, I've got one more question that's listed on here. Somebody else wants to add. I'll do one more question after this, and then we're gonna call it quits. But
Okay.
this one here is. I was asked by someone today if they could invest in my small business. I said no, but when or would it be a smart thing to bring someone else to your table?
Whew, that that can be tricky. So when you get into investing into small businesses, you get into legal structures. You got partnerships, you got LLCs. If someone's going to invest in your business, you're going to have to go through most likely a law firm and or a CPA firm, practically just for that to work legally, because you're going to have different legal paperwork filed. So you likely are going to want to seek counsel anyway, whether you actually go through with it or not. So that's just, let me preempt it that way and say that this isn't just a simple thing of, yeah, let me take your investment money. Make sure you always go through the legal process. Don't ever just do like a handshake deal. I know that sounds really basic, but you'd be surprised there are people out there that get conned that way. So make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's. Um, there are also businesses. I actually have a personal friend. I'm actually on his advisory board. They have they do multiple services. They have a consulting firm, but part of what they do is they're actually the person who negotiates business sales and business purchases. I'm not sure if they do investment sides or not. If someone just wants to simply take an investment, but even seeking out companies like that, where you have an independent third party who has a financial vested interest to come to a common resolution that benefits all parties, rather than just the other individual, that can be a way to go. That way, you can find out, do they want to have an active ownership where they have involvement in the day-to-day operations of your business, or do they want to be passive? They just simply want to give an investment and then down the line get a return on their investment, but kind of be hands off. So there's a lot of nuance there that you have to talk through and make sure everyone's on the same page when it comes to that sort of thing. Um, you may just want to do it yourself. Like, part of that is also knowing, what is your goal for your business? What is your aim? Do you want it to be a family business? Do you not want anyone else involved because you want to keep it in the family? That's one thing. Then you would only want passive investment. You don't want someone who has enough ownership to be able to dictate the day-to-day types of things. So those are things you could discuss with, the legal side, CPA side, or having a consulting firm kind of manage that as well, just to make sure everybody's on the same page and it benefits everyone.
I think once you bring on an investor, whether they're silent or active, passive or active, you bring on an investor. It's no longer just your business.
Correct. And that's where you have to figure out, well, how much? Like, if you want someone, and everybody knows majority is simply 51% or more. Okay. So yes, the majority owner is going to have the most say so, but they have legal rights if they're an owner. So even if that's a small ownership, they have legal rights. So you can't just ignore their perspective. So it's a whole other ball game when it's no longer just yours. Doesn't matter if it's two of you or 10 of you. It changes immediately when you go from one to two or more.
Right. All right. Well, I think That's it for questions from everyone else. If you have other questions that you want to ask, go ahead and throw them in the feed, and I'll shoot them to Josh at a later time, and he can try and answer some of those maybe, if his time permits. I've got two questions. They're a rapid fire question answer kind
Okay.
of a deal.
Okay.
And then we'll close out, and we'll be done. First question is what was the most impactful book you have ever read regarding your faith that had the greatest impact?
Okay. I'm glad you said faith, not finances. Oh, I'm going to go with Bill Johnson's book on the Holy Spirit, the most recent one that he wrote on the Holy Spirit, because a lot of that was the timing of when I read it. It's not always just the material; it's the timing of where you are in your faith walk, and that one really helped me with the relational side of seeing Holy Spirit as a person within the Trinity, not just this weird mystical force. And that's been very impactful in every facet of life.
Do you remember the title of that one? It was it
I'm going to look it up because I remember the picture of the image, and I know he's written more than one, so I want to make sure I tell you the correct one. 1 second. That's why I have my computer right here.
nice. I was say he's written a few of them on the Holy Spirit.
Mhm.
That's why I'm
Here we go. Hosting the Presence.
hosting the presence. Okay,
That's
so
the one.
that's actually a fantastic book. I love that book.
Yeah.
So
I
hosting
could
the
easily
presence.
give others, but that one, I think, given the timing of when I read it and where I was in life, that one was very, very impactful.
All right. All right. And the last question: if you could change anything at all about the church, what would it be?
Oh man, I got to pick one.
Yep, just one. Just one thing.
um, a holistic, kingdom-minded approach to ministry, and I'll try to do that super cliff notes. When I mean holistically, I mean we don't just park it on one facet, but we look at the whole of how do we mature the believer. Got to get them in, grow them up, mature them. That's the equipping, and then how do we at some point there's got to be the release part as well. That's the equipping side. You and I know fivefold ministry is a piece of that, and a very vital piece of that. That's what I would change. There's way too much of the church that just kind of focuses on one or two little pieces, and not enough places, in my opinion, that look at the holistic approach of how do we actually build the people that are the church and release them into actually making a difference.
All right. Well,
I think
brother,
that would fix a lot of the other problems.
I think it would. I think it would fix quite a few of them. well, well, brother, this has been fun. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on and talking with us. Hopefully those who have watched and those who will watch in the future will be blessed and be able to really dig in a little bit, and kind of take off. If you could do me a favor, send
Yeah,
me those points that you had mentioned earlier.
yeah, we'll
Um,
do.
and if you'll send me those points, what I'll do is I will attach them down in the feed of Facebook, and I'll also attach them to the YouTube video whenever we put it on YouTube, so that people can take a look at it. So, but
Sounds good.
Josh, thank you, brother.
Thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. All
Yes.
right. God bless you. You have a great night, brother.
All right, you too. Bye.
All right. Bye.